Number 1. The OKAMOTO case. On 1st May 2006, 5 bodies were found in one-room apartment of 35-year-old Manahiro Yamauchi by Yamauchi's mother. Yamauchi was hanging from a loft opening, and his half-sister Rikako Okamoto was lying on a futon. The wrapped remains of 2 babies and a young child were also found hidden inside 2 sealed cardboard boxes. Police had no idea who the 3 children were, but suspected Yamauchi might have killed Okamoto and then committed suicide. However, Okamoto's mother Chizuko was also suspected and was arrested 2 days later. Rikako was determined to have been strangled back in October 2005, and Yamauchi is believed to have died in March 2006. Chizuko claimed that Yamauchi killed Rikako and the 3 children, then hung himself. Eventually, she confessed to strangling Rikako herself, but still denied knowing anything about the deaths of Yamauchi and the 3 kids. The young boy found might be Chizuko's son, Toshihide, who disappeared in 1984 when he was only 6 years old. Toshihide has never been found, and Chizuko insisted that he was kidnapped by North Korean secret agents. On December 23, 2007, Chizuko was sentenced to prison for 12 years for Rikako's murder, but the bodies of the 3 children have still not been identified. Number 2. Yasuko Watanabe. Yasuko Watanabe was the daughter of an upper-middle-class Tokyo family and an economics graduate of prestigious Keio University. In 1980, after graduating, she got a job at Tokyo Electric Power Company. Watanabe disliked the job since she was forced to wear a uniform and serve tea to her male colleagues and bosses. But the salary was good and she made enough to support herself and her widowed mother. After a few years working there, she became extremely disappointed that she wasn't promoted to a position in the Foreign Ministry or the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Around 1989, when she was 32 years old, she also started working as a prostitute. According to one of her regulars, she was driven to try it out after a married male colleague ended an affair between them. Watanabe had a very precise schedule when it came to her second job. She would start working after 5 p.m. and she gave herself a quota of 4 customers a night. She would solicit nearly anybody, sometimes sleeping with a man for as little as $20. Her diary, which was very detailed, listed some 88 men she had sex with, including dates, times, and fees. On 19th March 1997, Watanabe's body was found in a vacant apartment. She had been strangled to death. One of the men named in her list, an illegal Nepali immigrant named Govinda Prasad Manali, lived right next door. Manali voluntarily went to the police himself to clear up any suspicions that he killed Watanabe. They, however, arrested him for working illegally. At first, he denied knowing her, but eventually had admitted to having sex with her 3 times. For weeks, the police tortured him by kicking, punching, and pulling his hair until he confessed to the murder. Manali spent the next 15 years in prison, insisting that he was innocent and that his confession had been forced. Eventually, a DNA test proved that some semen found in Watanabe's body wasn't his. The Tokyo High Court declared him not guilty, and he was deported back to Nepal for overstaying his visa. The case still remains unsolved. Number 3. The INOKASHIRA Park Dismemberment. On 23rd April 1994, a woman cleaning worker finds a male ankle at a garbage collection site beside the outdoor stage of INOKASHIRA Park in Metakashi, Tokyo. The ankle was in a super plastic bag with 4 piles laid. After that, fragments of 27 bodies were found. Both were put in a translucent plastic bag, and it was abandoned in a garbage box around the pond. Only parts of arms and chest of the body was discovered. There was not much of head and torso. The bodies were sent to Kyorin University Hospital in the city for judicial dissection. Professor Yoshinobu Seto, who was in charge of the dissection, first noticed that each of the bodies of the plastic bag had been cut at the same length. Not only the length but also the thickness, such as shaving the meat. The trash can of INOKASHIRA Park is a post type, with a lid of length 20 cm and width 30 cm. But the bodies were cut to just the size to put it in the trash can. Each piece was cut exactly to the length of 20 cm. The parts had been completely drained of blood, and all of the fingerprints were scraped off in the hands and the feet, and the palm prints were scratched. It's possible the victim might have been alive during the dismemberment, but the medical examiners weren't certain. Although a third of the body was never found, including the head, the pieces were identified 3 days later as belonging to 35-year-old architect named Saichi Kawamura. At an autopsy conducted at Kyorin University Hospital, the cause of death was deemed unknown. Kawamura lived less than a mile from the park and was last seen on April 21st. He ate dinner with his family that evening and afterward went to a karaoke with an old co-worker. He left his friend around 11 p.m. but never returned home. His family reported him missing the next day. Despite police questioning 37,000 people, the case has never been solved. There were reports of 2 suspicious men walking in the park and carrying a plastic bag around 4 a.m. on the day of Kawamura's body was discovered, but they have never been identified. Other witnesses said that they heard the sound of a car colliding with something in the very early hours of the 22nd. It's been suggested that Kawamura was struck by a car, and that his killers cut him up to get rid of the body. One popular rumor even claimed that Kawamura had been a member of a religious cult and was brutally murdered after trying to leave it. Whether the murder was an attempt to hide a tragic accident or the work of a deranged surgeon, this case is one of the strangest I've come across. Number 4. The TAMA kindergarten teacher murder. On the morning of January 14, 1997, the authorities in the Tokyo municipality of Tama City received complaints that sewage had been overflowing from a manhole between Nagayama Station and Tama Center Station. When city workers arrived and removed the manhole's lid, they noticed something like a mannequin floating in the sewage. They contacted the police, and the mannequin turned out to be a body of a woman estimated to be between 20 and 40 years old. The overflowing had been caused by a piece of flesh that had fallen off and gotten stuck in one of the sewer pipes. The woman's autopsy was unable to determine the time and the cause of her death, although she did have a broken nose and fractured skull. From dental records, the body was identified as Fukiko Yagihashi, a 39-year-old kindergarten teacher who disappeared on February 28, 1996. The evening before her disappearance, Yagihashi left work and was seen shopping at the Tama Super City grocery store around 7 p.m. It wasn't like her to miss work, so her family reported her missing to the authorities. Her house seemed all in order and showed no signs of disarray. Police found the groceries she bought left untouched in her fridge. 2 notable things, however, were missing: her purse and a diary she had used from 1990 to 1991. Like many women, Yagihashi never went anywhere without her purse, which she used to carry her wallet, diary, and savings passbook. Before she had vanished, her savings account held over 7.5 million yen. Yagihashi had previously talked about wanting to go back to her hometown, but no withdrawals ever took place before or after her disappearance. This has been an extremely difficult case to investigate. It's uncertain whether Yagihashi had walked off alone or with somebody else, voluntarily or against her will. As for the old diary that went missing, if Yagihashi was abducted, perhaps the culprit took it because it mentioned him. There's also the possibility that Yagihashi wasn't killed the night she went missing. While her body had been found wearing the same clothes she disappeared in, her long hair had been cut short. Additionally, while her father had been staying in her house from March 1st to April 6th, he received 6 mysterious phone calls. Every time he picked up the phone, he heard only silence on the other end. Since Yagihashi lived about 200 meters away from the manhole, some have suggested that the killer was a local man and an acquaintance of hers. Because of the location of her body, it was also suspected that the killer worked for the city. The manhole, after all, couldn't be opened unless with special tools. The only suspect in the case, a man referred to as Mr. K, did fit this profile. Mr. K lived in the area, worked for the city, and admitted to having known Yagihashi. Despite a weak alibi, he was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Unfortunately, the case today is as cold as it was 18 years ago. Number 5. Mysterious boats in Japan. The mystery started in early November 2015, when 4 empty wooden ships were found in the Sea of Japan. Since then, an additional 7 wooden vessels have been found, with the Japanese Coast Guard reporting at least 20 skeletons and decomposing corpses on them. The most recently discovered boat was brought to port in Fukui and reportedly contained 7 bodies. All of the bodies were partially skeletonized. 2 were found without heads, and 1 boat contained 6 skulls. The first boat was found in October. Then a series of boats were found in November. The skeletons and badly decomposed bodies of 7 people were dressed in clothes that bore labels written in Korean Hangul script. Alongside them was a squid fishing equipment, empty plastic bottles and cigarette packets. The remains have been cremated, the ashes unclaimed. Japan isn't sure where the boats came from, but several signs point to North Korea. Most carried equipment and signs written in Korean, and one was carrying a scrap of cloth resembling a torn bit of North Korean flag. Speculation is swirling about what the boats were doing out at the sea before getting wrecked. Some reports say that they were likely fishing boats that were sent out to gather food, but their old engines and heavy frames prevented them from steering against currents. Others say that the deceased could have been defectors trying to escape North Korea's regime. While the boats have attracted attention recently, this is hardly the first time they have washed ashore in Japan. CNN reports that the bizarre ghost ship incidents have been occurring for years. A total of 283 boats have washed ashore, with 12 being found in a 5-week period. Yet, the Coast Guard doesn't know exactly what's causing the people's deaths. Number 6. The murder of MAKIKO Tsukiyama. On November 21, 1984, around 2:10 p.m., a 2-year-old girl named MAKIKO Tsukiyama was found fallen on her face in a drainage ditch in an alley behind her home in Higashi, Osaka City. MAKIKO was unconscious, and her neck seemed as though it had been strangled with a cord. Although she was rushed to the hospital, MAKIKO died 9 hours after she was taken there. The fact that MAKIKO had been playing outside by herself wasn't unusual in the neighborhood, since other children and mothers were often outside too. Nobody, however, had seen MAKIKO's murderer. Yearly, MAKIKO had been found unconscious on the same spot a month earlier. She had been strangled that time too, with the marks of a string around her neck. Unlike the second time, she had regained consciousness shortly after being taken to the hospital. Immediately after this first incident, MAKIKO's grandfather received a strange phone call from an unidentified woman. The woman was crying hard and speaking incomprehensibly. He tried talking to her for 2 minutes before she suddenly said, "I'm sorry," and hung up. MAKIKO's grandfather had not yet heard about MAKIKO's incident and thought the woman had gotten the wrong number. For the next few days, he received several more unexplained phone calls. Every time he answered, he heard only silence on the other end. Police originally thought the first incident was an accident. They concluded that MAKIKO had gotten her neck hooked around a vinyl strap that had been attached to the door of her house. After MAKIKO died, however, they decided to launch a criminal investigation. It was strange that MAKIKO had been found in the alley, since she had refused to go anywhere near it since the first incident. Since there was no scratches on her face, it was suspected that somebody lured MAKIKO away and then strangled her in a different location. In the 30 years since MAKIKO's death, neither her killer nor the mysterious woman who called her grandfather had been identified. Number 7. MIEKO MIZUNO and HIDEKO AKASHI. On May 23, 1979, 2 female workers from a Nagao Kikyo grocery store, 32-year-old MIEKO MIZUNO and 43-year-old HIDEKO AKASHI, finished their morning shifts and went over to Nohara Hill to collect ferns. Later in the day, Mizuno had to pick up her son from the nursery. She never arrived, however, and nobody saw her the rest of the day. Her family reported her missing to the police, and they found her and Akashi's dead bodies on the hill 2 days later. Akashi had been stabbed in the heart, and Mizuno had been strangled. Their money and backpacks were untouched. In one of Akashi's pockets, police found a small note that said, "Being followed. Please help. This guy is a bad guy." Additionally, Mizuno had received over 50 bruises. Her pants and underwear had been taken off and was raped with a branch. Both had their Achilles tendons cut. Akashi had about 30 bruises as well as 9 broken ribs and a lacerated liver. Police suspected that the murderer might have some knowledge of karate. He left behind the knife used to kill Akashi, and a piece of hair was also found. There were some small shoe prints near the bodies. They considered the possibility that there was also another killer. On the day of the murder, there were 15 people on the hill and another 40 construction workers in the area. Two of the workers, some young men identified only as K and M, were suspected, but they were eventually cleared. Another pair of suspicious young men were also spotted that day, but police were never able to figure out who they were. Number 8. The disappearance of Yamagamis. On June 4, 2001, 52-year-old Janko Yamagami was scheduled to take a business trip to Dalian, China for the travel company she worked for. Before leaving, she was also supposed to attend a meeting. By noon, after Janko hadn't showed up to her office or gotten on board her plane, her colleagues began to get worried. They checked her house, where she lived with her husband Masahiro and mother-in-law Seigusa. But nobody appeared to be home. The family dog and Masahiro's car were gone too. The Yamagami's daughter, a 26-year-old elementary school teacher named Chi, was also missing. She lived alone in an apartment in nearby Takehara City, but came over to visit her parents the night before. Chi was the last member of the family anybody had seen. At 9:30 p.m., she picked up some makeup from a colleague and then headed for her parents' home in the small mountain town of Sera. The Yamagami's neighbors heard a car door close at 10:50 p.m. Either this had come from Chi after coming home, or it was the sound of the Yamagamis leaving. None of the neighbors were sure. Whatever it was, the family's newspaper delivery man reported that the car was missing when he came around 4 a.m. The Yamagami's front door was locked, but the back door was open. Nothing in the house appeared to be disturbed. The kitchen light was left on, all of the beds were made, and breakfast had been prepared. As ordinary as the scene appeared, however, there were a couple of strange details. The Yamagami's pajamas were missing, and while their shoes had been left behind, their sandals were gone. Janko's luggage and the 150,000 yen she needed for her trip was also inside the house, and so was Mashiro's pager. It seemed that the Yamagamis suddenly dropped whatever they were doing, took the family dog and quietly left the house in their pajamas and sandals. A year into the investigation, the case seemed to be going nowhere. The Yamagamis had good reputation and weren't involved with any particular shady or dangerous people. Masahiro did have some money problems, but it wasn't serious enough to leave town. On September 7, 2002, police recovered a car that was found submerged in a reservoir. The car contained the bodies of the 4 Yamagamis and their dog. No cause of death could be determined, but there were also no signs of anybody being attacked or bruised. Because Masahiro was in the driver's seat, police believe that it was a murder-suicide or a group suicide. But there are some things that make me suspicious whether it really was a murder-suicide. If Masahiro really did kill everybody, how did he manage to convince the other family members to get in the car, especially when they were getting ready to eat breakfast? Or did somebody force them to leave? Might they have been trying to get away from somebody and Masahiro accidentally drove into the water? The case remains unsolved to this day. Number 9. The Setagaya Family Massacre. On December 30, 2000, the Miyazawa family went about their business as usual in the Setagaya district of Tokyo, oblivious to the fact that they were living their last day of their lives. Mikio Miyazawa, 44 years old, worked for Interbrand, a London-based consulting firm. His wife, Yasuko, 38 years old, was a teacher, and they had 2 children, 8-year-old Nina and 6-year-old Rei. The evening of their last day alive, a witness saw the Miyazawas shopping at around 6 p.m. at Seijo-ga Quenmei Station, just under a mile from their home. A neighbor confirmed that at 6:30 p.m., their car was not in their driveway. At 7 p.m. that evening, Yasuko called her mother, who lived next door with her sister and her sister's husband. Nina had also visited her grandmother that evening and had used her computer to watch a recorded TV program until 9:38 p.m. At around 10:40 p.m., the family computer received an email that required a password to open. This is the last time that we know Miyazawas were alive. On the morning of December 31, 2000, a relative of Miyazawa's family found Father Mikio, his wife Yasuko and their daughter Nina, and their son Rei dead in their home. While Rei had been strangled in his bedroom, the other 3 members of the family had been stabbed to death in 2 different parts of the house. Authorities speculate that the killer had gotten into the home from a bathroom window on the 2nd floor of the house around 11:30 p.m. He went into Rei's room and strangled him as he slept. MIEKO was found on the 1st floor near the staircase, possibly coming up the stairs after he heard the intruder making noise. The female Miyazawas were killed next. Probably the most chilling aspect of the case is that the killer made himself home after the massacre. In fact, authorities believe that the murderer stayed for another 11 hours. Perhaps after bandaging himself in the kitchen, he then opened the fridge and helped himself to its contents. Though there was some alcohol available, the killer didn't take it, leading police to believe that he doesn't drink. The killer ate some melon, drank barley tea, and ate some popsicles. He wandered around the home as he ate the popsicles, discarding 2 wrappers in the kitchen trash can, and winding up in MIEKO's study, where he discarded 2 other wrappers. After going through some personal documents, the killer sat down in the victim's chair and logged onto the computer. Between midnight and 1 a.m., the killer browsed the internet for 5 minutes and 18 seconds. He visited the site of Shiki Theatre Company and attempted to buy tickets to see a show. The Shiki Theatre Company was an internet bookmark that had been saved by MIEKO. Then again, sometime in the morning, the killer used the computer for 4 minutes and 16 seconds. He visited the webpage of MIEKO's company and Yusuko's school, then killed the power of the computer by pulling the power cord. The power cord was not found at the scene of the crime. The suspect's fingerprints were not found on the keyboard, but they were found on the mouse. Perhaps after attempting and failing to purchase the theatre tickets, the killer continued strolling about the house, rummaging for information on his victims. In the living room, credit cards, bank books, driver's license, and other personal identification information was spread out as if the suspect had been sorting through them. Police found plenty of evidence. This included a bloody sweatshirt, probably worn by a killer. It was too big for any of the Miyazawas, but was covered in blood and didn't have any knife holes in it. They also found blood from the attackers, and they believed at least one attacker was injured in the murders. Finally, the next morning, a taxi driver picked up 3 young men in the area, and one of them left blood in his cab. Despite the overwhelming amount of forensic evidence found, the perpetrator or perpetrators of this deeply disturbing crime has never been found. Number 10. The Monster with 21 Faces. In 1980s, the Japanese food giant Izaki Glico was blackmailed by a mysterious group of apparent supervillains, calling itself the Monster with 21 Faces. It started with 2 armed men who broke into the home of the president of Glico, kidnapping him in front of his family. The men held the executive in a warehouse, calling the company and demanding 100 million yen and 100 kilos of gold bullion. Fortunately, before the ransom could be paid, Izaki managed to escape. However, this was only the beginning of a reign of terror. A couple of weeks later, several cars in the company's parking lot were set on fire, and the surrounding area was destroyed. Then the monster began to send letters. In May of the same year, Glico received a threatening letter signed by the Monster of 21 Faces, which was sent in a plastic container along with a hydrochloric acid. Because why the hell not? The monster claimed that they had poisoned Glico's candies with cyanide. After some discussion, it was decided that all Glico candies would be pulled from the grocery stores throughout Japan. This was disastrous and resulted in loss of more than 20 million and caused more than 400 workers to be laid off. The monster even taunted the police by detailing in a letter its method of entry, what typewriter it used to write the message, and where it found the container with the acid in it. The police only had few leads. It was reported that a security camera in a grocery store had captured a man not affiliated with the store putting Glico products on the store shelves. The man wore a baseball hat and was difficult to identify. Also, there was only one man in the footage, and it was known that there were at least 2 men involved in the kidnapping of Izaki. The police didn't know how many people they were looking for. As time went on, the monster widened the letter writing campaign to include the media. In one letter saying, "Dear stupid police officers, don't lie. All crimes begin with a lie, as we say in Japan. Don't you know that? You seem to be at a loss." All of Japan was terrified. Candy sales plummeted. In the summer of 1984, the monster turned its attention to other food manufacturers. The police continued to track down the few clues they had. They remained stumped until late June. In that month, the monster said he would put an end to his activities in an exchange for 50 million yen. The money was to be thrown out of a train speeding towards the city of Kyoto. The drop-off location would be signified by a presence of a white flag along the route. The money was gathered and an undercover policeman boarded the train and looked for the flag. The policeman did not see a white flag, but did notice a fellow male train passenger acting strangely. The policeman described the criminal mastermind as a man having eyes like those of a fox, which would give him the nickname the Fox-Eyed Man. Despite an effort to keep the man under surveillance, the suspect managed to elude an investigator in the Kyoto train station. The same mysterious man was spotted again later, in a car during a sting operation. He escaped once again, but the cops found the car and the radio transceiver that he had been using to listen into all of the police communications during the sting. In October 1984, he sent a letter to several news stations. It was addressed to moms of the nation, with a warning that he had poisoned 20 sweets around Japan. By February 1985, police had found all the poisoned products. They totaled 21. Interestingly, many of the cyanide packages left around candy manufacturers' properties and even in stores had a label that read, "Warning, dangerous toxins." Did the criminals expect 20 packages to be located and then win the game with the police when the last laced product led to the death of one civilian? Or perhaps they never truly expected anyone to die from their poisoning and just wanted to outsmart the detectives. In January of 1985, based on a previous store video footage and a description of the man on the Kyoto train, the police issued a wanted poster. However, nobody came forward to identify the suspect. A police superintendent got so frustrated by being outmaneuvered by the monster that he actually committed suicide by setting himself on fire. Once news of suicide was reported, the monster sent what would be his last letter to the media, saying in part, "The police superintendent died. How stupid of him. We got no friends or secret hiding place. What have the police been doing for the last year and 5 months? Don't let criminals like us get away with it. We decided to forget about tormenting food companies. If anyone blackmails any other food companies, it's not us, but someone copying us. We are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies. It's fun to lead an evil man's life." The monster tormented several corporate giants for years, mocked the police, walked the streets as some sort of most wanted man in the world, and not a single one of them ever got caught.